right? That's a young tree. Think about a young person, a young human being. What do they look like? Did they have wrinkles? Did they have gray hair? Did they walk stooped over? Did they complain about their aches and pains? No. They haven't had anything to complain about yet, right? They're young, they're strong, they're vibrant, they're growing up, right? Like a young tree. And then as life goes on, adversity comes to the tree. It can come in so many different ways, right? The big tree falls on the little tree, snow load, ice, wind damage from a hurricane, maybe just bad luck, right? You grew up next to the power line. You get to a certain point and they start taking limbs off of you, right? Stuff happens to them. And what do? They respond to it. How do they respond? They reorient themselves to continue the life process that has to go on if they are to live. That is, they go to the sun. Always. They fall down this way on the hillside, what do? They start growing up. They get beat down again, they grow up again. Constantly. Never end until the tree's dead. What is the end result of all that? Branches that look like this. Branches that do all kinds of stuff. No, they don't just all go out like this. You know, they don't tilt downward because they're old. Right? That's the way I was taught. You want to make a branch look old, you bend it down. That makes it look old. It's like, well, okay. There's an old tree over there, it's doing this. How come it's not doing that? Well, because this is like a caricature. It's a thumbnail sketch. It's like, yeah, sometimes trees, because they're carrying all that weight out there, it brings the limbs down. So they angle downward instead of angling upward. It's true, they do that sometimes. And sometimes they do stuff like that. Why do they do that? Because they broke, and then they regrew, and then they broke again, and they regrew, and it just goes on for however long the tree's alive. Decades, right? And the really, really old trees you see, 1,000 years old. You can see them here in North Carolina. You just got to go look at the bald cypresses down at the coast. 1,000-year-old trees. And you look at them, and the bole of the tree, the trunk might be straight, maybe. But when you get up to the top, all the limbs are just going crazy because they're struggling to live. Life keeps throwing stuff at them, and they keep taking it and trying to make it, right? And some don't. And that's why we revere the old ones when we see them. Oh, look at that thing. Imagine what it's lived through. You know, how many hurricanes tore that thing apart, and there it still is, alive and struggling. This is a key element to what makes bonsai fascinating. If you can capture a little bit of that, that story never gets old. All living things respond to that story. Especially us thinking ones, the ones with feelings and all that. We see something that talks about the struggle to live and the adversity that you face in everyday life and how it shapes you over the course of time. And there's a tree that tells you that story. And you can relate to it intimately. And the older you get, the more resonance that story has. Because the more truth of it is revealed to you. Right? When you're young. Why does bonsai appeal mostly to older people? You can relate to it. Yeah, you can relate more and more to it. Plus, it takes a long time, and young people don't have any time. It's funny, older people, they're reaching actually the end of their license, right? Not to get personal or anything, but we're all running on a shorter lead than we used to have, right? And now bonsai becomes more and more interesting. Young people who have all the time in the world, except for the random crazy ones, they're not so keen on bonsai. It's like, yeah, it's kind of interesting, but I hear it takes years. So,
what happened to the fourth tree?
The fourth tree went in the ground, and I just dug it up 2 years ago. It has a trunk this big.
Wow.
No joke. Now, to make it that big, I had to let it grow, right? That's how it works. When you put a plant in the ground, it's kind of like you surrender the level of control you have when it's in a pot, and in return you get more growth. And with more growth comes more development. Typically in the trunk. When you put a plant in the ground, that's primarily what you're concerned about, is building a bigger trunk, right? And then when you go to collect it, you're going to cut most of the branches either off or shorten them dramatically, take it out of the ground, introduce it to container culture again, which is a big life change for a tree, and then assuming that it goes well, then you start working on branching, right? First primary branching, then secondary branching, finally ramification, and it's a process. Well, because I let that one grow unrestrained, when I went to collect it, I had to cut roots like this big. And then as a result, the tree really went into crisis mode, and big chunks of it died, right? Which in the past I would have looked at and said, oh, that's terrible, you know, look what I did to that tree, I ruined it. And instead, now the way I look at it, it's like, wow, that's going to be really interesting, right? Because it didn't kill it. It didn't kill it. It really damaged it, right? So again, if you're worried about the plants having feeling, you cut off, top it like this, right? Like this. Had a nice, vigorous, growing shoot going up there. Cut it off. What did it do? Well, it sent out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new points of growth in response. Well, sometimes it works like that. And sometimes it says, heck with you. You know, if I can't grow here, I'll just waste this part and grow over here. This could have died off and this taken off instead. The plant isn't trying to create a beautiful image. It's just trying to live. And whatever way facilitates that is the way it's most likely to go, if it can. So, when I dug that tree and cut those big roots, it died back. And for a while I thought I lost it, but then it came back because life is resilient. It sent out all kinds of new stuff. I let it keep everything that it produced that year, right? No more taken away, right? Because I felt bad. I was guilty. I'm not going to cut you ever again. I let it grow for a year. And then this year, that was last year, and then this year I started shaping. Next year, it'll be ready to go into a bonsai pot. And I have to do carving on it because now it has dead wood. Right, it has big sections of dead wood. Well, dead wood on the deciduous tree. Can't tell you how many years I steered clear of that because the books I were reading said, don't do that. You don't have dead wood on a deciduous tree. You can have it on a juniper, you can have it on a pine. You don't have it on a maple. You don't have it on an elm. For goodness sake, that's in bad taste or something. I don't know what it was. But yet, when I go out and reference nature, what do I see? All the time. Just like the coniferous trees, the deciduous trees, suffer dieback, they have dead parts, they don't last as long, but they're part of the tree's ability to recover and keep going. Parts die, other parts still live, keep going. So we can do that with deciduous trees. These branches, I'll invite you to come by and look at it more closely later. You look at the way they're shaped, they do all kinds of things that as beginners you should never do. Don't do this, don't do it like this. Whatever you do. Because people will say bad things about you when you're not around. and they'll think that you don't get it. You don't get it. No, bonsai's not about making trees look like trees. Right? It's about making the beautiful image. The perfect tree. In the course of my learning, I came across this older gentleman who had been in bonsai for a long time, and he said to me one time, he said, bonsai is about the perfection of nature. And even then, when I didn't have clearly formed ideas of my own, I thought, that's wrong. That's wrong. The perfection of nature, perfect in what sense? Perfection implies, one, that there is such a thing as perfect, and two, it's a judgment call, right? What's perfect for you might not be perfect for you. Obviously, right? That's just part of life. That's why life is full of conflict. If we all thought the same thing was perfect, then we'd all get along perfectly. But we don't. We each have a different idea of what perfection might ought to be. And the idea of perfecting nature, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Nature is this force, right? This elemental force. You don't perfect it. What's that mean? Make it more like us? Make it more to our liking? Oh, the perfect landscape, a golf course. Gently rolling, neatly clipped lawns, tiny shrubs, a few big trees, but out of the way so they don't hurt anything. This carefully managed, micromanaged, everything finessed and refined kind of take on nature. It's fine if that's your cup of tea. If that appeals to you, then good. You can do it the way the books say and you'll get that kind of effect. But if you're more into the experience of being out there and seeing how they really grow, then you understand the only perfection there is comes in the totality. All the parts are imperfect. It's only when they're all together that they're perfect, right? So when we shape a tree, there's all kinds of imperfections. You know, this branch coming down and then angling back up, the movement, you know, the fact that multiple things come up to form the crown, not just one thing, multiple things. There's a show coming up that's put together by a member of your club, Steve Zeisel. It's a great show, great bonsai show, the Winter Silhouette Show. I'm sure you've heard about it, coming up in Kannapolis next month. Great opportunity, especially for those of you who are new and have not seen a bonsai show perhaps. Go to that show and see all these very, very nice trees that some skillful people have grown for a long time, and see them without their leaves, right? You see their structure, see how they're built, and then compare in your mind's eye those trees with how trees outside the building look. You'll find lots of variants. Some not so much, some extremely so. Some people like their nature really, really neat and tidy. If it's a look that pleases you, then that's the right look. Other people want their trees to look rugged. Dan Robinson out in the Pacific Northwest, he wants his trees to look like they're dying. Seriously, that's not like they're dead, but like they're struggling to hold on to life. He loves that look. He looks for it in nature, and then he shapes his trees that way. And you can imagine what kind of response this gets from people who like their trees to be very neat and tidy. They look at his trees and they say, he doesn't know what he's doing. But he does know what he's doing. He's just wanting something different out of it. For me, what I want are trees that look like trees, because I find the general public responds very favorably to them. They don't have to imagine they're part of some other culture. It's their own culture. It's what's familiar. Now, even within those parameters, there's still lots of room for art, right? These are not in this arrangement by accident. They didn't just happen that way. All these branches